E3 Alliance's Road to Recovery webinar, a priority playbook for your school. This is our fifth installment of this series, and we are excited to share more ideas with you today, including a school leader doing work aligned to the playbook. Before getting started, I wanted to let you know that we will be providing the slides and recording of the webinar to all participants in the webinar follow-up. As well, the link to these resources has been added to the chat. And if you have not done so already, please add your first name, your role, and where you're at to the chat so we can create a Road to Recovery community of learners. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A feature. We'll answer a few of your questions towards the end of our time together. Also, please engage with us on our social media platforms. Tweet or post by tagging @E3 Alliance. We also want to take a moment to thank our sponsor, the Lola Wright Foundation, for supporting the Road to Recovery series and resources for educators. We are part of the team at E3 Alliance, a nonprofit based in Austin, Texas, whose mission is to transform education systems through data and collaboration so all students succeed. Our presenters today are myself. I'm Lori Davis. I'm the Director of Transformation Partnerships with E3, and I'm also a recovering junior high principal. And with me is my colleague, Amy Havard, Director of School Transformation, who's also a former school leader. We also have Leticia Maynard and Terry Clement with us, who are helping moderate our session today. School leaders are doing the essential work of ensuring our schools are open and safe, as well as providing the best possible learning experience for their students. As former school leaders, we are honored to have our guest panelists take a moment out from her important work to join us today. Carrie Fulgham is the Coordinator of Digital Learning and the Virtual Academy Principal for Lubbock ISD. Carrie's district has made some strategic moves to support student learning through the challenges of the past year, and we are so excited to have her here today to share the story of her learning, her successes, and some of the great work her district is doing. Thanks for being with us, Carrie.
Thank you for having me.
We will start with an overview of the priority playbook before focusing on the concept of acceleration, an educator mindset approach that strengthens the work of two of our playbook plays, leading forward and closing the gap. We know COVID-19 has impacted all parts of our lives, but more specifically, it has challenged everything we think about with schooling and learning. The priority playbook is a tool to help guide your school towards recovery and transformation by providing you a structure for planning, to help you focus on what is most important, and also how to get this work done. Before we dig into the playbook, review the chart on the screen. We are in this crisis with emergency remote learning starting last March and at the end of last school year. We are still in the transition phase, but we've reached a critical point where we are strategically managing the ever-changing dynamic and demands of the pandemic, as well as tasked with looking strategically forward, planning and leading for a strong finish to this school year, and also take what the lessons we've learned and apply them to our leadership so our schools can come back even stronger next year. By learning from each other and using the structure of this playbook, we can make schools reflect our new world and create a new normal with what is possible. So let's get started. Let's learn about the priority playbook. This playbook can support you wherever you are in the journey towards transformation. First, leading forward is focused on strong leadership that will guide the transformation. Leading forward is the pathway which runs through the whole part of the playbook. Next, we ensure a safe place where our staff, students, and families are healthy and secure throughout the year. Then we send a message that we are all in this together by ensuring students and staff are attending and engaging in our community no matter the modality. Once we have them attending, we can then focus on continually reigniting our school culture to make sure that everyone feels that they belong. And finally, we close the gaps for all learners by providing them with equitable, high quality instruction. please remember this is a marathon. It is not a sprint. As well, this marathon course throws many obstacles every day, especially like last week with the snowpocalypse. But we must look forward, move forward, and think about how we overcome, transform, and succeed for our students. Our focus today is a leadership mindset shift that we will serve to align with and strengthen your work for leading forward and closing the gap. Specifically, we will be sharing ideas around school leaders shifting away from an intervention remediation mindset to that acceleration mindset. Shifting away from the traditional focus on what students don't know or can't do is beneficial for all students, but especially responsive for the students most impacted by the disruptions to their home and school life over the last year due to closures, transitions, and the aftermath of the pandemic. Researchers have and will continue to produce data on how COVID 19 has impacted our students. What we currently know is that the typical measures of unfinished learning, most commonly referred to as a loss of learning, are showing dramatic increases, resulting in greater challenges to student success in the future. This loss of learning opportunity means that schools will need to be more strategic and do more than ever before to address differentiated learning needs, as well as maximize the effectiveness of Tier 1 instruction. How do you ensure your school is providing effective Tier 1 instruction, strengthened by an acceleration mindset? Here's what it looks like. Critical content is the focus. Where remediation can seem like a never-ending effort to recover something lost, acceleration is an empowering approach for students alike because it means focusing on the most important things students need to know and are able to do for mastery of their current grade level. All of this can be made even more effective through thoughtful strategic assessment and instructional design, as well as alignment across all tiers of instruction. Acceleration of learning means a student-centered focus on the most important learning, with differentiated support for all students to learn successfully. Before we dig into the first playbook category, I wanted to let you know how this content is structured. For each section, the first two slides will be from the actual priority playbook that we have available to you. Following the playbook slides, we will show a few examples of what this can look like in a school. So let's start with the first playbook category, leading forward. Why is leadership in its own category in our playbook? Leadership is the capacity to translate vision into the reality we want for our students and our schools. The playbook indicates that effective leaders engage with diverse representative team that collaborate and check the pulse of the school community frequently, using a decision-making process anchored by the school's mission, its vision, goals, and improvement efforts. Leading forward also means recognizing and focusing on what is in your control. While there still may be many things outside of our control this year and next, school leaders can make a difference within their sphere of influence by fostering a continuous improvement mindset and grounding all work in your mission, vision, and goals for students. Another priority for leading forward is communication. Leadership communication is critical to ensuring the right work gets done. It's a tool that leaders use to build a framework for success and ensure all stakeholders have a voice. As well, effective leaders are strategic in their use of resources, not just funds and assets, but also the greatest resource of all, our teachers. Staffing and scheduling practices aligned with the vision, mission, and values of a school can have a significant positive impact on the efficacy of the school community. So let's look at an example of strategic staffing. Take a moment to skim these ideas for consideration for staffing decisions. As leaders plan and strategize for staffing for next year, they'll want to think inside, outside, and all around the box. Not just who is leaving and who you will hire the best new talent to fit your school, but also how can you better utilize the educators dedicated to your campus. One way is by looking for positions that have extra time in their schedule. For example, you may have a journalism position and enough students to seat 4 classes. This leaves at least one or more periods when this position is available for acceleration support. Another way to strategically plan for staffing is to look at the unique strengths of your teachers to determine which teachers are most effective in particular roles. Do you have a math teacher who is more effective with struggling learners? Or maybe you have a very effective teacher in a non tested subject that could be utilized to support acceleration. In addition to making strategic staffing decisions as you prepare for next year, it is very important to remember to communicate how and why decisions are being made. Make sure all educators on your campus view themselves and all staff members as valued partners in the campus focus on acceleration, and not just as an impacted bystander. Part of the process is gathering input from teachers through interviews or surveys, asking about their perspectives, their preferences, or ideas for how they believe they could support acceleration for your students next year. So now Carrie's going to share with us her experience with strategic staffing this year when creating a virtual academy for Lubbock ISD. Carrie, what process did you use to strategically select teachers for the virtual academy, and how is this process communicated to everyone?
Yes, thank you. So we started by really focusing our thought process around our mission for our district, which is to nurture, develop, and inspire every child every day. And so that really meant that we needed to provide the same um, opportunities for our virtual students that were provided for our students that were face to face in a classroom. Um, we also have 3 pillars that we focus on: valuing data, loving people, and developing leaders. And each one of those played a role in our staffing plan. So we started by looking at our needs as far as how many students we had that were requesting virtual instruction and how many students requested face to face instruction, and started building the data from that. And obviously, that plays an important role in class size and where you can staff that. And so we looked at that data in order to determine how many staff members we needed on each campus per grade level and how many we needed for our virtual academy per grade level. Um, and then once we had that figured out, then we were able to really kind of turn the roll over to our leaders in our district and our campus principals. We're able to look at their staffing and determine the strengths of their staffing and where they would be able to find teachers that really did a good job and excelled in virtual teaching last year when we had 2 months of virtual instruction, um, and which teachers that really excelled in the face-to-face instruction. And so they selected the teachers from their campus that would provide virtual instruction. And then I built a staffing plan from that for our virtual academy. And they built their staffing for their campuses based on their face to face staff there. And so each grading period, we look at that again, we reevaluate our data, we go back and see what we need to look at as far as adjustments that need to take place. Um, we like to get the teacher's input on who is thriving in virtual instruction and who would like to go back face to face in this and teach in the classroom, and try to take that into account as well.
It looks also like you were very thoughtful about the entire process to ensure that you had the right staff to meet the needs of your students. How do you see a similar process being applied to planning for acceleration next year?
For sure. So obviously, when you're looking at that for next year, you have developed some people that have already worked through this virtual teaching. And so we want to look at our strengths there. Um, who did really well? Who was able to really embrace the virtual aspect of instruction? And how can we build a staffing plan on based around those leaders? Like I said, one of our pillars is developing leaders, and I think that this year has given us a chance to develop some of those leaders for the virtual pieces. And so as we move forward, I think we focus on those pieces that really did well and build around those, and then look at our pieces that we didn't feel like were as successful and what changes need to be made there.
Thanks, Carrie. Our last example in leading forward is to rethink any summer, after school, or other special programming you might have available on your campus now and next year. I know a lot of the leaders right now, we're really looking at master schedule for next year. So this is the time to think about how can this additional instructional time be utilized to help students master their grade level standards instead of remediating them on the standards they have not mastered from a previous grade. One example is by rethinking your plan for summer programming. This summer, consider an acceleration camp instead of the traditional credit recovery summer school. This means identifying the most critical standards or the ones the students most have traditionally struggled with for the upcoming grade and pre-teaching those students who are attending summer programs. In Lubbock ISD with Carrie, they have been doing this for several years. Can you explain to us, Carrie, how school leaders plan for summer programs and how do you identify students to attend and what do students and families do who are participating?
For sure. I'm going to give a lot of credit here to our curriculum and instruction team and also to our campus principals. Um, our curriculum team develops a very broad um, plan for summer, and then they really let our campuses develop what's best for each campus. We do have unfinished learning. We do have to meet those needs. We do have students that need to complete their credit courses that they weren't able to complete during the year. And so a lot of our campuses are focusing on doing that piece right at the very beginning of summer. That way they just continue that unfinished learning in order to move forward. But we've got a lot of campuses that have recognized that we want them to come in with the foundation that they learned from last year, but we also need them to have some of the pieces that we're going to be moving into for the next year. And so we have a couple of campuses that have really chose to take the summertime as a chance to build up their students to prepare for the next year. Some of them are calling it an accelerated program where they're going to do more academic pieces that revolve around hands-on learning and project-based learning. And then we also have some campuses that are calling it a bridging program. And so they're trying to meet the needs of every student. Students that need to readdress some of the standards that they weren't successful on, students that are ready to move forward and may need to build some of the skills in order to take a more advanced class for the next year. And so we've really let all of our campuses choose some of those things. Some of the things we put in place are we've requested that they keep the class sizes very small because we want that to be individualized as much as possible for students. Um, and then we really want to do our best to prepare them to be successful in the next year. And so that's kind of the focus of summer school. And then we let our campuses do what's best for kids as far as the kids that they choose and the program that they have on each campus.
It is so exciting to hear the steps your district is taking to address that unfinished learning and acceleration for your students. Now, Amy is going to be sharing our next stop on the road to recovery, closing the gap.
Thank you, Lori. Now that we've talked about leading forward to ensure acceleration is happening, our next priority focuses on closing the gap and the work of ensuring instruction is effective and equitable for all students on your campus. Closing the gap includes strategic adjustments to curriculum, which allow teachers to truly focus on the most essential content, and also on using systems of assessment to inform planning and teaching. Both of these plays are especially critical to implementing successful acceleration of learning on your campus. Also, implementing evidence-based practices and effective instructional models is essential to closing the opportunity gaps that have been exacerbated by the past year. So we're going to look at some examples of how you can lead systems for an acceleration mindset on your campus, thinking about these best practices and effective instructional models. In order to effectively accelerate, all teachers and leaders need to be clear on what standards are most critical to be mastered. Acceleration will not be effective if you try to pre-teach everything. Narrowing the focus allows that limited time and resources that you've identified to support acceleration and ensuring they're used on the right standards, on those things that students most need to succeed that year. Selecting the critical content for acceleration can be done for the year and or for each unit, and should involve both tier 1 teachers and any acceleration or support staff that will serve that same subject and grade level. If you're selecting for the year, plan time for teachers to collaborate vertically this spring or over the summer to identify 7 to 10 of the most critical standards for students to master throughout that course. If you're selecting for each unit, ensure a protocol that teachers use several weeks before each new unit to study the standards that are in that unit and select 1 to 2 that are most critical. You can find more information about how to select critical content for a unit in a previous Road to Recovery webinar from July 2020. Either way, ensure that the work happens far enough in advance that acceleration lessons and supports allow for pre-teaching those critical standards that have been identified before the concept is taught in Tier 1 instruction. To engage by course, we suggest that you start your work in the spring or maybe June or August. Take a moment to read through this process before I continue. The 3 rounds of this process allow for the experts at those grade level teachers to bring in that vertical perspective before selecting those critical standards for their course for the year. And the last step, goal setting, is definitely key. This will help teachers and school leaders monitor the progress on each standard throughout the year. Now let's look at an example of a goal that could result from round 3. This is a SMART goal one ELAR team wrote for a focus teak they selected for their course. I'm going to give you a moment to look over their SMART goal. They selected this teak because it's frequently tested and spirals through many of the units throughout the year. They use their historical performance to determine an attainable goal for this year. And again, this is one example of a SMART goal that might be written before you ever start your year if you're planning on accelerating. Another leadership move that Lori has already alluded to back in the Leading Forward section is that it's important to set up effective acceleration into your master schedule and your bell schedule for the year, making sure that both of those allow for the needed collaboration time for teachers and has time set aside for students to receive that instruction outside of their core classes. Here's an example of a master schedule that has both flexible grouping during morning drop-off and a built-in advisory that varies by grade level throughout the day. Thinking about that master bell schedule that we just looked at previously, when else could acceleration happen throughout the day? Having an acceleration period is just one example of how you can build it into your school day. Finding time for acceleration can happen in lots of different ways. Some schools build that common advisory period that happens 3, 4, or even 5 days a week at all the grade levels at the same time. Other schools designate an intervention or extension period per grade level, like on the previous schedule, that allows support staff to rotate through and serve each grade level throughout the day. Other schools find ways to leverage any extra time in their schedule, such as drop-off or pickup times before or after school. Now, acceleration may also happen during tutoring, small group instruction, and regularly scheduled blocks of focused learning if you have an extended block. As leaders, this is where we need to be creative to plan ahead and designate both when and how acceleration will happen when you're creating your structures for next year. For schools that have a designated acceleration time, again, like in the bell schedule we looked at a few moments ago, it's important to ensure that planning systems are in place for that time. We could probably all think of examples of wasted intervention time because either a teacher hadn't adequately prepared for that lesson, or it was looked upon as a homework help session and lessons weren't prepared either. Here's an example of an acceleration unit plan that teachers can create at the same time they're planning out their next unit. So I'll give you a moment to look over the plan. Again, this plan was created by the core teachers as they were studying their unit and planning out instruction for their unit. So to make sure that it was aligned with the instruction that students would be receiving in Tier 1. You can see that the acceleration lessons begin 1 week before the unit, and that those lessons are focused only on that one critical standard that the teachers identified for that unit. Acceleration means that we plan to strategically prepare students for success right now by planning some or all of these things to happen before they approach the concept in Tier 1. That could be activating or even providing prior knowledge. That could be explicitly teaching vocabulary or pre-teaching the big ideas or concepts that will be involved in the unit. It could also be providing a just-in-time preview of the unit. Any of those things would be appropriate for those acceleration lessons that you've designated time for. So how do you lead instructional systems for with an acceleration mindset? Think about how to support and monitor. So starting with supporting teachers in an acceleration mindset, but providing those structures both for the professional learning and for collaboration that they'll need to be successful. And then think about how you'll monitor acceleration by both participating in those collaboration and in those collaboration sessions where teachers are choosing the critical TEKs and planning for acceleration, but also in ensuring that leaders on campus are planning observations of those acceleration classes to calibrate the instruction that's happening and make sure that it is what has actually been planned. Another way to support and monitor acceleration is by building deliberate systems of assessment. Database decisions are crucial for effective acceleration and for all instruction. Understanding student mastery and progress fuels the acceleration process by allowing for adjustments to content, grouping, and dosage throughout the year. Just because we have a plan at the beginning of the year doesn't mean that plan is going to be the best fit for students throughout the rest of the year. We have to ensure that we have deliberate systems of assessment to help us adjust our instruction along the way. With hybrid classes and disruption to local and state assessments throughout last year, finding reliable data seems hard, but it is possible. Again, our guest Carrie has worked with teachers throughout this year to identify sources of data and have in-depth discussions to ensure everyone knows where students are currently and how they're progressing. Carrie, can you tell us how you worked with teachers this year to identify data and ensure it is usable to monitor student progress?
Absolutely. I think this is one of the things that we um, started with a plan and we continually adapt as we go. So, one of the very first things that we knew we needed to have in place, like you discussed earlier, was in the scheduling. We needed to have time for our teachers to have those conversations, and to be able to collaborate on how students were doing and discuss that as teams and as grade levels. So that's where we started with. And then I joined those conversations and discussed data with them, partially just because I like it, but also just because um, it's good to have an outside opinion sometimes of somebody that is not seeing the student every day. Um, so that's part of what we've added into. Um, we've asked them to kind of notice trends over time. With virtual instruction, there's been a big shift. All of our students that started in a virtual academy at the beginning of the year um, started with a lot of support at home as well. Um, Over time, we've seen that decrease a little bit. And so we've seen that our data seems to be more based off of what students are doing on their own and independently than with the support of somebody at home. So we've noticed that trend over time through virtual instruction. Um, and you see it a whole lot with your primary grades, your pre-K, kinder, first grade students. Mom and dad helped out a whole lot at the beginning, and now they're kind of understanding that the kids are capable of doing some of those pieces on their own. And so we're really starting to see that show through. And then we use those pieces, and that can include all sorts of data. We've got assessments that we give, common formative assessments. We've got district assessments. We have intervention, iStation and Dreambox that assess students monthly. Um, and then we have classroom instruction time where teachers are working with kids, whether that be whole group, small group, independently, one-on-one. And taking all of that data and making really an overall picture of the students' progress, and then seeing where we need to go with that. Is the student low performing and we need to provide some extra support, or is the student high performing and we really need to see what we can do to provide some building pieces for them where they're still being pushed? So that's our next step, is when we're talking, is just really working with the students on that. Um, One of my big focuses has always been relationships, and I think that plays a huge role. No, it's not part of your data, but it really helps you determine how valid your data is. And so we've worked on building relationships and how those play a role. We want to look at the student as a whole and develop a plan for each individual student. So some of the things that we've seen that were really neat, we've got some after school book clubs for virtual kids. We have GT groups that are working with teachers from the next grade level to try to provide some acceleration. We have seen some of our students not want to do their online intervention pieces like Dreambox. And so I had a teacher call me today and ask if they can have an after school gaming time for kids that have completed all of their Dreambox intervention pieces. And so that provides them a different thought process and really provides them some things that are not only engaging for kids, but are also looking into the coding world and some of the pieces that are going to build different thought processes and give the students more opportunities moving forward.
Carrie, thank you so much for sharing that. I love that idea of being really flexible and using those relationships and making that part of your evaluation of data, because we all know we can collect lots and lots of numerical data on students, but I know a lot of people this year are concerned about the validity of data, as you mentioned, with people helping their students at the beginning of the year, or students who are in the building but having to take assessments virtually. Are they always engaging with that as much as they would have in the past? And so I love what you're saying about, bringing that relationship in to both evaluate the data, but then to ensure that you're thinking outside of the box to build that response to data as well. So Thanks so much for sharing your experience in leading those data conversations this year, because again, we know that to make acceleration really successful next year, we have to constantly ensure we know where students are and what the next step needs to be for those students. So all of these ideas and examples have been intended to help you see how a focus on acceleration is an integral part of the road to recovery. Let's look at a tool that our team has developed to help you as you plan. On the Road to Recovery resource page, you can find the Priority Playbook Roadmap. This Roadmap is a downloadable tool to help you and your team organize and make concrete plans both for now and for next year. In the roadmap, you'll find tabs to think through each priority with examples of what the work might look like. The last tab of the roadmap will help you prioritize your ideas and your plan for implementation. Many of the ideas and examples discussed in today and previous webinars will need systems and planning in place as soon as possible to make them happen. So download the tool and start using the roadmap now. Now I'm going to turn it over to Lori to look through any of the questions that were submitted. Lori?
Yes, thank you so much, Amy and Carrie. One question that came up was, you mentioned a little bit, Carrie, about how you had some extension activities for your GT students. So how did you implement, I think you had told us in a previous conversation about a Google site for extension. So what did you do for your students to give them an extra challenge?
Sure. We have, for the elementary kids, we have some of the after school programs that they can participate in. But our secondary students, we also added some AP pieces into a Google site. And every curriculum department provides some bonus activities. And that may be a writing assignment, or it may be something that they create. And usually it's a creation piece where students are creating something. And those are updated weekly so that the students have something new to challenge themselves. And they're self-paced for the kids. So if they have a whole lot of work and they're not able to get to it on Monday or Tuesday, but then they want to do that later in the week, that's fine. So they're able to kind of do that when they have the time and when they're looking for something extra to really accelerate their learning.
That's great. Amy, I'm going to ask you this question. It's talking about that mindset shift about among staff when we're moving from remediation to acceleration. So can you help? How do we develop that in our staff?
Absolutely. So this is definitely a very challenging aspect of anything having to do with our job, is how do we change the mindset? How do we change those preconceived notions from what we've always done before to trying something new? So there's a couple different things you can try as school leaders. One of them is, all of us are educators because we love learning. So definitely engaging your staff in either a book or an article study on some of the research or some of the best practice behind acceleration can help. That's definitely something that you could engage in, again, as an entire staff, and it becomes a project of you guys learning together and building this mindset together. The other thing to do is to really think back to some of the comments you probably heard from staff members before, or looking back through results. We know we've been trying remediation for years. We've been trying intervention for years, and it feels like this never-ending cycle of always having to go back and reteach and intervene. And I know personally, when I was a math teacher on a middle school campus, there was a lot of, oh, well, students should have learned this last year, but they didn't. And so part of that might help motivate teachers to try acceleration, is through acceleration, you can make sure your students learn it before you get into that unit, right? It's a way to ensure your students walk into your core classroom ready to learn with the skills and the background they need to be successful in that unit. So that also might be a way to help motivate them, either through the learning or looking at, evidence of what you tried in the past and how successful it's been. Definitely knowing that the staff learns about acceleration and sees the reasoning and the best practice behind acceleration, that's the know better. And that's the first step for us as educators to do better. So once we've got that learning or that groundwork to start building that mindset, actually engaging in the work and seeing success, seeing students be more successful on a unit assessment because of the acceleration, that goes a long way towards building the mindset. So a lot of it's just digging in and making the work happen so teachers start to see those increases in those student successes that motivate them to engage further as they go through.
Okay. Carrie, there's a question about strategic staffing. So you did talk to us a little bit about that, but what are some ways that you can determine the strengths of your teaching staff? What are, if you could do a little bit of a deeper dive on how you did that?
Sure. From the very beginning, I relied on the campus principals to determine the teachers' strengths, because they were obviously hired by that campus principal or they had worked with them previously. And so I relied on that from the beginning. As I've gotten to know my staff more, I have figured out who my leaders are on each team. I've figured out who wants me to just hand them over the stuff and let them take over, and who needs more guidance. I've moved some people around that felt more comfortable in a different content area or a different grade level. So I'd really done it through developing relationships, talking with teachers. We have meetings that are very to the point and bullet pointed, and we've got to get through all of these things. And then we have meetings where we just talk about life and what's going on, and we have teacher challenges. Last week, we created a cookbook as a virtual staff, where everybody just shared their favorite recipes. And so we just develop relationships to where they feel comfortable enough to tell me what's working and what's not working. And then as I've seen things, I've seen progress with every teacher. Every teacher has made tremendous strides in their teaching and then in their instruction. And I'm able to lean on them for guidance with other teachers. So sharing examples, when I see somebody's lesson plans that look outstanding, just highlighting that and pointing out the things that I feel like are really beneficial for kids. And then the next week, I see that across the board on all their lesson plans. And so that's been really beneficial, is using each other. One of the neatest things that I've seen in this, we have 31 elementary campuses, and I have teachers from all of those campuses, and they're still at that campus. They're still teaching from that campus, but their teammate that's teaching the same students as them is on another campus across town. And so it's been really neat to see all of our campuses come together in that way. Um, the relationships that they've built and the way that they've built on each other's strengths and weaknesses has been really beneficial for everybody involved.
I think that's great. And I think that what you shared with us not only can work in a virtual world, but it can work in the brick and mortar school too. And as leaders, we have to be bold enough to encourage those to be in the right place, even though they might not agree at the time, to shine, to do what's best for students. And I know that's hard because I know all of us have worked with some amazing teachers, and we knew we needed them in a very critical area, and it was hard to get them out of their comfort zone to do that. Well, that's all of our questions. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Amy so she can finish up.
Thanks, Lori. Before we close out, we'd love to have your feedback and to get input on what you'd like to learn more about on future Road to Recovery webinars. So can you take just a moment to visit Menti.com and enter the code on the screen? The link to the survey will also be put in the chat in just a moment, or you can use the QR code that's on screen. So again, I will stay silent just for about 1 minute. If you guys will please take this time to go through and complete that quick survey. There it is in the chat. Thank you. All right, and I will wait just about 30 more seconds for you to complete that survey before we look at the last few pieces. All right, thank you for completing that. We really appreciate your feedback. Please use the playbook and roadmap to help you on the road to recovery and transformation. Share these tools with other campuses and district leaders that you know. We know this is hard work and that this is a hard time for all of us this year to keep up with the news and latest guidance while we're adapting everything we do in schools. And that's why it's important to build partnerships with organizations, and we can be that partner for you. So you can contact us at the email on the screen about partnership opportunities. And at webinar, we'll focus on the culture category of the recovery playbook, specifically on the reintegration of students and staff back into the in-person community. So a lot of schools have students that are participating remotely this year, or you might have students in both categories. And so looking at how you can plan to help everyone reintegrate as school returns probably more back to normal than it has been this year. The registration to this event has been added to the chat, and we will also send it out via email. So we hope to see you there. Again, thanks to our panelist, Carrie, for your leadership and commitment to your schools and for joining us and sharing all your expertise with us today. Thanks also to our sponsor, the Lola Wright Foundation, and thank you for attending today. We're grateful you decided to spend this time with us this afternoon, and we hope the ideas and the examples that you've seen will help you, and we look forward to collaborating with you on your road to recovery.